right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Pater, the Journal of Solar Culture Solar Sunday stream. I'm joined by Ed Hamann, and we're kind of continuing to freeform discuss, though we do have some interesting explorations into poetry we've been getting into. It doesn't feel like there's a lot going on in current events at the moment. I mean, there's more shenanigans in Minneapolis, of course. When is there not? Foreign international politics seem as tense as ever. I heard some rumor about a Canadian-American disagreement over the ownership of international waters, or whether they are international waters or not. That seemed vaguely interesting. But it doesn't seem like there's much to discuss, and I kind of like these slow weeks because it makes it easier to focus on the more personally relevant stuff. And in our brief conversation before we went live here, it sounds like Ed and I have been going through separate but parallel explorations of poetry and the origins of poetry. And Ed, would you give us a brief introduction to the myth of the Mead of Poetry? This is something I thought I was familiar with, but it turned out I was not in our some of our discussions from earlier last week.
Well, for starters, I'm only so familiar with it myself, and I'm terrible at pronouncing Old Norse, so I'll probably skip over that idea. But I'm getting more and more familiar with it as time goes on, because it has this incredible sort of group of sort of syncretic crossover with another myth about a sacred libation, which is the myth of Soma in the Rig Veda. But the Mead of Poetry, basically, it starts out with all the gods spit their saliva into a vessel, and this divine being, Kvasir, is born from it, the most wise being there is, who then travels around sharing this wisdom. Incidentally, that reminds me of another Vedic myth where Mitra and Varuna ejaculate into the same vessel and create a sage as well, Agastya. And it's because they get super horny over this nymph, and their way of dealing with it is to ejaculate into a vessel, both of them. That has its own meaning, but
it sounds gross, but I mean, all of us come from at least half of that, so.
Well, it's like this sage is so sagely and so manly because he was born from only semen. But so this Kvasir, this being, goes around spreading wisdom all over the world, and then is captured by two dwarves that kill this being, and then mix its blood with honey and create this mead of poetry. And then it's a really complex story. There's a lot of details to it.
So the vessel of the spit of the gods is not the mead of poetry, but it's this initial
catalyst for the birth of
this wise being,
the most poetic wise
and
being.
The blood of the wise being becomes the mead of poetry when it's mixed with honey.
Mixed with honey. And there's a whole bunch of details, but then basically Odin then becomes a falcon, a bird of prey, an eagle, actually, and takes this mead of poetry away. And there's a whole bunch of other things that ensue. And then, but in this process, a drop of it falls down to Midgard, to Earth, and supposedly that creates, the desire for poetry in a half-assed way in humankind, I guess, is how I take it. Bad poetry, The poet share, I think, is a phrase that comes from that or something. But
who are the awful poets in the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy universe, where they like kill people by reciting poetry at them? I forget. There's a particular race of their national racial pastime is like bad poetry, and they think they're good at it, and it's like a torture method. Anyways, continue.
Sounds like open mic night at the cafe. Yeah. So that's the basics of the story, but there's a lot to it, a lot of meaning to it, and the Soma story. Soma in the Rig Veda is multifaceted. Soma is a drink, a libation, which is made from a plant. So it's a plant as well. It's also a god, deified in his own right. And what happens with Soma in the Rig Veda is that it is the sacred libation that gives exhilaration and strength and poetic inspiration to Indra, another, sort of thunder god category god like Odin. And the way that Soma enters the earthly realm is that it's being stored up in the heavens. And it's being guarded by archers, specifically this one heavenly archer named Krishanu. And a falcon appears. The falcon steals the Soma and then flies away with it. And while he's flying, this archer shoots an arrow, but only brushes the falcon, and a single feather drops down, which is sometimes spoken about as the Soma itself coming down to Earth. But then the falcon takes the Soma to Manu, who is like the first sacrificer, the first man. It's kind of the Adam of the Vedic conception. And then it is ritualized and ready to be prepared for Indra, because Indra cannot do his great deeds, such as the killing of the serpent, the opening of the cave to release the cows and the dawns. None of the great things Indra does can be done without Soma. And so there's a lot of symbolism in that Soma is a god, but is also tangible with human beings.
There's like half a dozen Greek parallels that are. Some of these are familiar and we've gone over before, but some of them are new. So we've talked in the past about the relationship between Nestor's cup and Nestor's cup. And Nestor is associated with longevity. He's lived 3 generations, ruling over a 4th. Nestor's cup is the cup that Indra drinks the Soma from, it seems. So there's a connection there.
Yeah, there's 3 usually. Which, side point, there are 3 vessels involved later on in the Mead of Poetry myth, as well as 3 vessels in the Soma myth. That's another.
But this Mead of Poetry from the north, the Proto-Germanic iteration of this Proto-Indo-European shared story, points to a possible answer here to this question of what is Soma, because no one seems to know the answer of it.
No.
If Soma grants immortality, and if the heroic path to immortality is through Homeric poetic song, what if poetry is the Soma? What if that is it? Could it possibly be that simple?
Well, I mean, Rig Veda, for instance, utilizes metaphor in, I think, the very best way. But it was clearly a plant. Like the Rig Veda has 10 books or mandalas, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's all hymns, and they're all primarily focused on the Soma sacrifice and offering to the gods. But there is Mandala 9, Book 9 is entirely dedicated to Soma, right? Soma Pavamana, which means self-purifying Soma, which that's a key there, self-purifying. But it's a plant.
When it's a plant and a god and a drink and maybe one or two other things, apparently a bird, which
well, that bird was just a helpful bird, or sometimes people say it's Indra himself.
Well, in the Greek tradition, there is an image of a bird of poetry as well. There's this famous wall painting in the palace at Mycenae. It's the palace of Agamemnon, essentially. And this wall is painted basically the color red that's behind me here. And on this gray rock, there is a rhapsode in a white robe with a lyre playing a song. And there's this gigantic white bird flying above him, kind of out of him. That is the bird of poetry that was coming out of this rhapsode. And like whenever one entity has multiple, this is coming back to a linguistic word we might get into, hypostasis. We'll get to cross that bridge when we get to it. But whenever we have one object that is described as having multiple natures in this way, is it a plant? Is it a drink? Is it song? Is it a bird? Is it, that to me seems to be an indication of a more metaphorical identity and less literal.
Probably so in a lot of cases. In the case of Soma, I mean, mead, for instance, we know mead is a tangible,
yeah.
And mead was definitely made and offered to gods.
Yeah, the mead of poetry.
There's so many linguistic side points right now. I could, my head's gonna explode. I'm just
yes.
The root for mead is also, the root for mead in Old Norse is the same pi root for the word madhu in Sanskrit, which means honey. And Soma is repeatedly metaphored in poetry as honey or the honeyed one.
Yeah.
So they're essentially the same thing, though one is alcoholic and one is not. But
the blending of the blood of the wise man with honey to make.
Yeah.
There's
a whole chain. There's a whole chain, like the word, an entire chain leading all the way up to Madeira wine, linguistically from these pi roots. But going back to the idea of a plant. So in this mandala 9 dedicated entirely to Soma, self-purifying Soma, it's 114 hymns, and they all are poetically describing the moment that the pressed Soma is filtered through sheep's wool and then mixed with milk and or water to be offered. It's just this one little step. And there's 114 hymns, and it's, some of them are pretty basic, but for the most part, it's some of the most colorful, sort of imaginative poetry that's ever been conceived. And apparently it's a result of the poets drinking the Soma as well, because it's the source of immortality and poetic inspiration, and poetry can mean immortality because of memory and, living on with language. But there's a lot there that is about the effort that the poet priests have to make in order for Soma to be prepared for offering. It's pounded out on stones. The stones themselves are a sacred object. There are at least 3 hymns in Rig Veda dedicated just to the stones, which one of the things Odin does in the Mead of Poetry is he has to bore through stone at one point to get to the essence of this thing, right? Which ties in with the idea of stones, right? And effort effort being taken to get to inspiration, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So there's a great YouTuber named Tarl Warwick who goes by the name Sticks, Hex, and Hammer. And he once said in one of his streams that all alchemy and alchemy texts can be broken down into two things. There is alchemy texts that are instructions on how to make a potion that are actually about psychology in disguise. And on the other hand, there are texts that appear to be about psychology and politics and society and culture that are actually recipes for plants. And there's never anything direct. It's either one pretending to be the other or the other pretending to be the one. And at the risk of annoying you slightly, hearing this, because there is a tradition that seems apparent to me in Homer and to a degree in Plato and in some of the Norse stuff a little bit, but now seems to be coming into focus in the Rig Veda of self-referential kennings. So like the poetry is describing itself in a cryptic way and what it is doing. And it would be a very strange thing for the priests that gave us the Rig Veda to give us so many hymns, so many descriptions of the Soma, and still leave us baffled as to what it actually was.
Well, we have hints, though.
Huh?
We have some hints.
We have some hints, but we don't know. But well, there's an asterisk here. Unless, what if they did tell us? And what if it is not literally a liquid, but the hymns of the Rig Veda itself? Because you said some of these passages were some of the most vivid poetry in the Rig Veda describing this. What if that intoxicating mead of poetry is more the poetry than it is the mead, and the mead is the metaphor to understand what this poetry is doing, which connects it to eternal life, because poetry is the mechanism by which the hero achieves eternal life. It also flows from the blood of wisdom. This is very metaphorical. You don't actually kill a wise person to get poetry. Guys, don't get any ideas. They'll call the FBI. But this is, I have not heard anyone else advance this, but when you put together the Rig Veda, Homer, and the Norse myth of the Mead of Poetry, as you've explained it, with the connection with birds, the connection with plants, common metaphorical descriptions of the struggle that someone has to go through, sifting it through wool, boring through rock. If anyone's ever tried to write a poem, and really take an effort to get it right, they might understand the feeling of frustration and effort that goes in there. I don't know. I don't mean to offend the literalist tradition, but it seems like there might be something to a metaphorical interpretation in this case.
Well, I mean, of course there is, but there's also things can be metaphors of one another. It can be both a real. They can be metaphors of one another. When you read the Rig Veda, the hymns are often footsteps. The hymns are chariots all the time. The hymns and the speech within the hymns are chariots. They're warriors. They're kings. So I mean it's. You often will make simile out of things that both have value. It's like Indra opened the Vala cave with speech to free the cows who are the dawns, but it just so happens that the patron's gift to the poet priest at dawn was generally cows. So the cows, dawn is real, the cows are real. they're real objects of value, but they're metaphors for one another. The ruddy, reddish color of a cow is like the dawn, but the dawn is also like a beautiful woman coming up from a bath.
With rosy fingers, perhaps.
Yeah, with rosy fingers, which that,
Yes.
And so the metaphor, your argument is correct, but they're both correct at the same time. And one hint that we do have is that in the cognate tradition of Zoroastrianism, or the old Avestan tradition, they had Soma, but it was called Homa because of language changes. That tradition continues to this day. In Zoroastrian temples, they still have the Homa ritual, and they use ephedra, though it's not guaranteed that Soma was ephedra, though it is generally believed it was a stimulant. Some people try to say it was, it certainly wasn't alcohol in the Vedic world. It was not alcohol. But some people try to say it was a type of mushroom. But there is too much clarity in that poetry, too much of a sense of self-awareness and play with language that they weren't tripping balls.
Right.
They weren't hallucinating. They were tweaking, basically. It's like, well, it's probably a stimulant.
Well, and there's an altered state of consciousness that is alluded to, and it doesn't even necessarily require chemical induction.
No, not at all.
I mean, that can be at play. There's not, it's not for nothing that they call alcoholism the writer's disease, But like when Nietzsche writes about the intoxication of being overcome by a particular musical mood, like that can happen completely chemically sober. You're out in nature and you're just completely overcome by the grandeur of some open vista or a mountain range or a waterfall. There's a famous story of a guy who converted to Christianity. He was like a famous biologist or atheist type guy, and he was just out hiking and he saw this waterfall and it reminded him of the Trinity, and he converted to Christianity on the spot. And you're like, that is not a normal mental state, right?
No.
That is an intoxicated mental state. And I don't mean that critically. I don't mean that as a criticism, but it takes a particular altered state of consciousness to think poetically, to see the world poetically and mythically. And it's a little bit mercurial. It's a little bit hard to get your hands on what that is. And so maybe it is appropriate that it is described in terms of different intoxicants in different cultures. Nietzsche was very pro intoxication in this Dionysian sense, but he was very anti-alcohol. No one of the 19th century was harder on that. Well, there were some actually, but Nietzsche was a pretty strong opponent of alcohol, full stop. So he's not saying drink so you can write poetry. But there is this intoxicated, altered mental state that seems to be associated with poetizing.
Or religious experience in general. These were,
yes.
If you're working, super hard with, with your hands and your determination to grind out this beverage, and you're reciting poetry in hopes that Indra skips over your neighbor's ritual fire and comes to yours and sits down on your grass, and you believe that you've achieved that epiphany. You believe that you're a fucking winner, which is, the main belief of the Rig Veda, we are winning. You're gonna feel something, but this drink may have had stimulant properties. I mean, it was pretty important, so it did something. But in the order of fire, what do we say? Like we've been talking about Soma. Some of us have been talking about Soma since before there was an order of fire, really.
Yes.
And we have a lot of inside jokes. Soma, white monster, Gold Monster was the Soma.
A gold monster.
But
Yeah, that's going to be an old myth for the old folks of us.
We
They
collectively
took it from us. The golden age has fallen.
we collectively decided that Soma sort of is distilled excellence, right?
Yes,
which is what the Mead of Poetry would be as well.
It's poetry captures perfection in lieu of Gold Monster. Like if you don't have Gold Monster, then poetry that immortalizes hero is sort of the next best thing you can do.
But the Gold Monster gives you the power to achieve excellence.
Yes.
Through effort, right? And that's the interesting thing about Soma. Soma, as a god, like Agni, unlike all the other gods, human beings have a direct, tangible, in front of your face relationship with. The Soma has to be, human beings are required to press out the Soma in order for the greatest of all gods to do his great deeds, right? And Agni is fire, which we have some power over. We can start fires, right? But none of the other gods are like that. So it's an interesting relationship to a god. Soma being a god, being the source of inspiration, source of immortality, source of excellence, and being that himself. There's something there that just really turns me on.
There's like a I don't want to say a theosis, but an approaching of the god. I wonder, do you think that's why an altered state of consciousness is necessary to achieve this? Because it seems like there's something divine in good poetry. And so to like a normal person in a normal state who is mortal, acting as a mortal, cannot approach that, cannot create that. It requires a change of state in the direction of a superhuman power.
In the direction of excellence. In the direction of excellence. And I think it applies to more than just poetry. Like the sort of the essence of it for both of these stories. It's like I experienced something, let's say a really good lifting session where everything's just right. And you're in it, you're putting all of your effort in and you're achieving the best possible results for yourself at the time. Like I experienced something that feels like that makes my mind go to the idea of inspired thought, or like in the Rig Veda, it's inspired thought or well-crafted speech. Like there's whatever it is that creates that. It isn't just for that.
Right. And it feels like it's coming from outside of yourself, like you're a conduit for something. This is why the Greek,
from the inside to the out.
Well, maybe like I
feel like it's my pressing. It's my pressing. I'm doing the internal Bodro.
But there, so this question then, this feels like a really good segue to this question: is excellence real? Like excellence is not a thing that exists in the physical world. You can't point to excellence. And so this begs the question: is excellence real, or is excellence just a word category that we've invented to describe many things?
I think it's like beauty in that sense. It's like beauty in the sense that it's subjective, but there's also a collectively subjective, objective experience of it.
Yes, but like what is the thing that is excellence that we are all collectively experiencing? And maybe it cannot be. Yeah, maybe it can't.
You know it when you're in it.
Maybe it cannot be conceptually captured, and it has to be described in poetic terms for us to even have the language to move towards a sort of conceptual idea of what it is. There's this, I've been very fascinated, more fascinated every month really, with not just Greek stuff, but the significance of Greek and by extension Proto-Indo-European, which includes Vedic and Latin and Proto-Germanic and all this. But there's some language here that we've lost connection with, but we still carry a lot of the connotations of these ideas forward. And the ancient Christians had this word hypostasis that says that they were talking about things like beauty and excellence. For them, it was the Holy Spirit. But there are certain things that we like to describe, categories, which do not have a stasis. They do not have being in the world. And so are they real? Is beauty real? Is excellence real? And their argument through this, with the invocation of this word hypostasis, hypo meaning underneath being, is that there are these things in the world that are not themselves excellence or beauty, but which express beauty and excellence. So like a flower expresses beauty, even though it is not beauty. It is a flower, but it expresses beauty. A scenic vista expresses beauty. A human form with particular features expresses beauty, so on and so forth. Stasis, the concept can have being expressed through its hypostasis, and this leads to this idea of the hypostatic union through argumentation I'm not as familiar with as I should be. I once was, but it's Christian stuff, so it comes and goes. But there might be I hate to use the word because it has a completely different medical connotation, but we could almost look at our archetypes, our ideals that we talk about, the striker, the father, the lord of the earth, as not so much hypostatic, because there's a metaphysical claim about the being of these concepts, the being of the Holy Spirit there. And I don't think we're making a metaphysical claim, but they might be metastatic, not hypostatic, but metastatic, sort of like above the being of these things. I'll have to think through it a little bit more about how that is different from hypostatic, but it's the metaphysical assertion of the being of beauty that is, I think, where they run into trouble. And if we look at, I didn't want to say this before, but it seems appropriate now. You were mentioning how in these myths, this primordial first liquid that is the progenitor of this is either a cup of mixed spit or independently a cup of mixed ejaculate. Those are both gross. Those are both messy.
But the ejaculate's a different story.
Well, but they're both this sort of this progenitor of wisdom that leads to poetry, right? And there is a messiness to true wisdom that we don't need to like be super gross about it. But I think the grossness feels intentional, especially when it is either independent or independently expressed, at least in two related traditions. They're both making a gross body fluid, metaphorical allusion to where this is coming from. And I think the messiness and the lack of clarity and cleanliness of the source of wisdom is kind of important. It feels important if it's being repeated in multiple traditions. And I think what is wrong with the hypostasis argument that Christians make is it feels too clean. It feels too like we don't need to, like there's no uncertainty or messiness to the origins of this thing. And it does take blood, sweat, and tears to write good poetry, to write well, to be filled with this inspiration. it often comes from profound sadness or despair. I don't remember who the writer was who said the way to write is to sit down and bleed. It might have been Faulkner, but I mean, even that ties in a little bit with some of the body fluids we're talking about.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, you know, and as far as like blood, sweat, and tears or effort, you know, some of the language, like you know, the divine in the Mead of Poetry, the divine being kvasir. The Pi root is kvas, which means to press or to crush. Soma has a different root, but it is cognate in meaning. So is the Pi root, and it means to press or to crush. And so, you know, that's the linguistic root of like both of those things that are the, you know, pressing, crushing is the source of inspiration. And I just think that, you know, there's a lot of sort of like, you know, aphorism calendar meaning for daily life that you can take out of that. You know, the idea of the
demotivational calendar. When life, you know, gives you lemons, make lemonade. And when life crushes you down,
yes,
pull out your pen.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, you got that PR today. I did. I made some lemonade.
Yes, that's awesome. Did you get a PR today?
No. Well, every Friday is a PR right now because of the program that I'm doing. This is strength-based. I'll be in a body cast in a couple weeks, probably. Yeah, with a walker. Like, yeah.
I saw some meme post that was like, it was a person but in like a battle room, and it's like, we'll give him unrelenting back pain for 6 weeks, but then we'll give him a random PR so he doesn't throw in the towel and quit. And then we'll give him a little drop of hope. No, that's too much hope. It takes him away. It's like calibrating the tension of the gym experience. It's fun. A touch of body dysmorphia.
Yeah. And you know, and another just weird interesting similarity between these is all of the gods that spit in the Norse myth into the vessel, they do that after the well-known Asir and Vanir war, which has a lot in common with the Hindu myth of the churning of the milk ocean, which involves a war between the Asuras, which is the same word as Asir, and you know, and against the anti-gods and the gods.
Is it comparable to the Titans and the Olympians in the Greek?
Yeah, it's like that too. It's all they're all three somehow go back to a more common myth. But yeah, they churn this milk ocean in order to bring forth amrita, to bring forth nectar, ambrosia. So it's there's a lot of stories that seem to trace back to the beginning.
Yeah, well, and it's always
and none of them require the Bible anyway. Sorry, I had to say that.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's always interesting when you get either independent arrivals at similar descriptions, which is like what we did in our essay on shooting. It's like, oh wow, these different roots for sin have the same metaphor. Curious, like there's something here. But it's slightly less interesting when there's a common ancestor and we just have variations of the same theme spreading out. But it's still pretty interesting when they are maintained, and it still feels like there's something, if not universal, then at least powerful in captured in these stories and in the associations. Because I think there's a lot of lost utility in the study of poetry. Agnator Jack has written about this of in one of his recent-ish blog posts or Substack posts about sex pollution, how when women come to take a field, men feel like that's a woman's field. We're not going to do that anymore.
Yeah.
I think that's happened a lot in language arts and English and poetry in general. It's like, oh, that's like a weird, effeminate women's thing to do. Yeah. But there's tremendous power in there. And I think people have lost touch with that power because they've accepted a very sort of Enlightenment, I suppose, notion of how language works. You see this in science, where we have a, what's the word? An operational definition. This is how I'm going to define this word in this context. This is what this word is going to mean as I use it. And it feels like that should work. We've defined it. We understand what we're talking about, so we can speak clearly, right? That's how it works, right? But I don't think that's how that ideal is descriptively how we actually experience and process the language. We can trick ourselves into thinking we're doing that. But in reality, words don't work merely by semantic definition. They work by evocation, and they evoke all associations that they have had sort of at the same time, with different weights based on context and use and so forth. But this is how words like retard, which was once a euphemism, right? We stopped calling people idiots because that felt rude. Let's call them retard, because that's Italian for slow. It's very fancy. It's like they're just a little slow. This was gentle, but because of what the referent was, this high Italian word, which is still used unironically normally in music. It just means slow down, slow your tempo. So you'll be playing along, and then you see the retard on your sheet music, and then you slow down. Has now acquired the connotation of like Down syndrome, like dumb. And then through incredible linguistic alchemy, has now acquired the meaning of brother, like hello fellow retards. That's this new internet connotation, and this it means all of those. And I can say, no, when I say retard, I mean Italian slow, but people are still thinking the other meanings, and understanding that by feeling how the language affects your body as you write it. Like, what does this combination of words do to me physically? Like, that is what poetry is doing, or trying to do, aspiring to do. And there's tremendous power in that. But it is a power that precedes all this operational definitions. You don't get an Oedipus complex, so scientific or pseudoscientific, if you're psychologically inclined, complex. You don't get an Oedipus complex without Oedipus. That's a pretty on the nose example, but like all of these kinds of descriptions require poetry to draw language from. And philosophy, you can't do philosophy or science or reasoning without this clay worked from the blood and sweat of the poets to have meaning on the table that you can then divide and shape into all of these ideas and theories and so forth. And the power of creating that clay, creating meaning with words, is something that I think is neglected, and particularly neglected in relationships. I think practicing poetry, it feels very esoteric, it feels very weird, but it's your power to communicate, to express yourself, to express things that are happening in ways that are vivid and vital and compelling to other people is it's not just impressive, it feels almost divine in some cases.
I was surprised, over the last few years, going back to the idea of sex pollution, literary sex pollution. Um, I, I was genuinely surprised at how many men in the Order of Fire are like, I'm writing poetry.
It's good.
I'm going to write a poem, or for their creative challenge, I'm going to write poetry. Like a pretty decent number of guys. And they're good at it.
Yeah. Madison in particular.
Yeah, he's really good.
Yeah.
But yeah, it just really surprised me because I just assumed like, oh, most guys are going to think that poetry means that they're dandy.
That is kind of the connotation. And I do love that for all that Dead Poet Society, I think gets, I don't want to say wrong, but like it's in some ways a caricature, but it does do a good job of making fun of that association. Saying no, the poetry was an occupation of real men of the past, great men of the past, cared tremendously about poetry. And it was always a kind of weird black pill take to think that poetry was low down or beneath you. It's funny to say that after getting through this Plato course, because of course Plato in the Republic makes a lot of criticisms of poetry, apparently. But there is, I was able to get about half the class on my side and think, no, actually, you need poetry in order to even get here. And it's I think even Plato ultimately pays his due respect to poetry, the power, utility, and beauty of poetry. And I think there is,
poetry has been really important and meaningful to men for a really, really long time in a whole bunch of different sort of areas of life. Whether it was, Rig Veda, it was, the poetry was absolutely essential for maintaining the order of the universe. Like without those hymns, axis tilts, and shit goes wrong, all the way up to romance or whatever that is. But poetry has always been super important to men.
Well, I think it can. People can often feel like, okay, poetry is nice, but the philosophy and theology is like above that. It's like the next tier above poetry. And I can't speak for all philosophers. I can only speak for myself. But in my own exploration study of philosophy, I've had the exact opposite experience. The further you go into philosophy, you're like, okay, there is a lot of cool stuff here. There's a lot of value, but a lot of that value is illuminating the beauty and value and even superiority, or at least maybe not superiority, the more foundational nature of poetry. It is in many ways more important than philosophy. And I say that as a fan of and promoter of philosophy. I think it's great, but I think it is appropriate that our oldest texts are not, and telling that our oldest texts of this religious nature are not philosophical tracts or legal tracts. Law and philosophy are fine, but I think myth and poetry, the story of Gilgamesh, the hymns of the Rig Veda, the tragic stories of Homer are more important and more foundational at like a building block level. You can't get those other things well without that mythic.
Well, and they will point to law and philosophy as well, because oral traditions, not necessarily with the Rig Vedic rituals, those were public, but they were not for everybody. But oral traditions like Homer or the Ramayana, which exists. You know, people still gather in huge numbers to listen to that poem be recited or acted out.
Mhm.
And there's plenty in Homer and in Ramayana that points to the law and points to philosophy. And it's a way for people to be engaged and understand those things. You know, just like the original Greek plays were lessons on your civic duty,
Right.
you know, and you know what your role was in society. If that, you know, that's
Right.
law and philosophy.
There's definitely a connection there, and a certain degree of intertwinement and perhaps coevolution. Um, but here, to really explore the whole chicken and egg question of this, you'd have to go back into prehistory, into the world before recorded language, and we can't do that.
No.
There is an interesting book by Roy Rappaport, who argued that ritual and language co-evolved,
Co-evolved.
and that we kind of couldn't have gotten language without ritual alongside it, and then religion properly understood came after ritual, which is kind of a mind-boggling thing to think about.
You can watch that movie Quest for Fire. Have have you seen Quest for Fire?
I have not.
It's great. It's a great movie. It does not have any language because it's like Neolithic humanoids. And they have fire. They have a little tiny source fire that they use for everything, and it's super important. And it's like inside of this little thing of sticks, and it goes out. And their village elder, they kind of talk, but they don't really talk. He sends them on a quest, and they have to go get fire. They have to go find fire that they can replace their communal little fire starter with. And they go on this long quest. They run into these sort of weird other group, but this other group knows how to actually start fire. And they teach it to them. Yeah, it's a great movie. No dialogue.
Interesting. I'll have to look that up. That's very.
But there's ritual, but no language.
Beautiful. I'll have to look that up. Maybe we can discuss that in a future Sunday chat.
It's on Prime. It's on Prime, but it needs to be restored badly. Like, it looks like you're playing someone's like VHS recording of somebody else's VHS recording. Yeah, it doesn't look good, but it's still great.
That's fine. You know,
it's one of my favorite movies.
Well, I'm definitely adding that to my list. My wife and I just finished watching Gangs of New York all the way through last night, which is an intense movie. I love Martin Scorsese and his stuff.
That's great.
And that's an interesting one because it's not tying in with poetry exactly directly, but there is something interesting in the way that my understanding is that Scorsese is a Catholic himself. And it's about the sort of Irish Catholic versus the Protestant, English Protestant gang warfare in New York in like the 1860s. It's like really concurrent with the Civil War, which is a big theme. And what's interesting is like the conflict is ethnic and it's religious, but the philosophy of Bill the Butcher, if you can call it philosophy, Bill the Butcher is what's his name's character, Daniel Day-Lewis's character, is very interesting because he's actually very open to particular kinds of foreigners, and he is extremely respectful of Liam Neeson's character, who he kills in the first like 5 minutes. Plot spoiler. He kills him in battle, and you find out that Liam Neeson's character had beat him up very badly and spared his life, but he has this character has tremendous respect for anybody who's willing to die for their cause. And the Catholic versus Protestant expression of faith is sort of secondary to this spirit, which is kind of interesting. It's very Mishima in a way. It's this like this strong respect for one's adversary, and you demonstrate your loyalty in blood. Like the opening line of the whole film is Liam Neeson telling his son, who grows up to be Leonardo DiCaprio, he like cuts himself with this shaving razor, and his son goes to wipe it off. He says, "No, blood stays on the blade," which is like, you hear that and you're like, that doesn't make any sense, right? You're just going to rust your blade. Why would you say that? But it's symbolic, right? We're not talking about the practicalities of blade maintenance. We're talking about the meaning of blood in identity and the shaping of an identity. In the case of Gangs of New York, we're talking about who is the true patriot, who is the true American. And the blood stays on the blade is some kind of answer to that question, expressed poetically in film. I suppose maybe there is a poetic tie in there. I forgot. Film is an artistic medium, so it still counts.
Yeah.
That would be a fun one. We can contrast Gangs of New York with Chuck Palahniuk's Adjustment Day, which is another great literary poetic exploration of the meaning of being American. But we've been going for about an hour. It seems like as good of a place to stop as any. Is there any final thoughts you wanted to add on the Mead of Poetry? Which is, we could talk about this and explore this for years, I
mean, there's so many layers that it's just,
the green tea of analysis.
Yeah. It's a really interesting crossover in a lot of different ways. And I think there's a lot of really important meaning related to idealism and the effort for excellence. Maybe excellence needs to become a verb. Maybe we need to start doing excellence.
Yeah. Well, to perform something with excellence is a verb.
I can make a verb out of it, a compound in Vedic Sanskrit.
It's a poetic challenge for someone. How do you verbify excellence?
The great thing about Sanskrit is that you can invent words. The language and the grammar is designed so that you can make new words that did not exist before.
That's fun thing you can do with Greek roots or Latin roots too. The trouble you run into is when people start to combine Greek and Latin roots. I've made that mistake once or twice in my time, and it's like, no, that sounds off. Gotta keep the Greek and Latin separate. Well, anyways, that's a poetic rule for you would-be poets. Anyways,
anyone that's interested in those stories, do your own research, man.
Yes, dig into it. For sure.
Anyone that's read Dumezil, he's written about some of these similarities.
Maybe that is actually an important point that we've neglected. It's not enough, I don't think, to just every once in a while sit down and write poetry. It's not even enough to just read poetry. Poetry is something that you should come back to multiple times. We are so inundated with repetition in our news media, and we understand the psychological effect of that, and we understand the negative psychological effect that we see on the news, politics, social media, and even though we understand that, we don't apply it in going back to the good stuff, the stuff that we know is good, the really excellent stuff, the Rudyard Kipling or the Rig Veda or the Havamal or Homer. Like, it is good to go back to those and to go back to them religiously, to go back to them as a matter. I've come to think of religion as any disciplinary approach to development of a spirituality. Spirituality meaning connection with a spirit It's that simple. It doesn't have to be all woo-woo and complicated. What spirit are you connecting to? You can't not be connected to some spirit. Which spirit is it? And religion is very similar. It means the religio, the etymology is like to bind or something. It's a discipline. It's discipline, essentially. You go to the gym with discipline. You go to the gym religiously. They are semantic synonyms as we use them for good reason. So reading poetry religiously has tremendous psychological and spiritual value and develops a sort of power that is mentally akin to the power you develop in the gym by religious devotion there too. So highly worthwhile. Just wanted to add that in.
Mm-hmm. Perfect purity is possible if you turn your life into a line of poetry written with a splash of blood.
Mishima.
Yes, that line right there. We've got purity, self-purifying soma, blood mixed with honey.
Yeah.
People say that sometimes the Buddhists have a saying that life is the taste of honey on a razor blade. Right.
Ooh, what an image.
Yeah.
What an image.
But it kind of is.
Like that.
It kind of is. But are you gonna let yourself get cut, or are you gonna choose your wounds?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That seems like a beautiful poetic way to close this episode. We will come back next week with more discussion on who knows what. Maybe continue with poetry, maybe the search for fire, or the quest for
acquisition of Greenland.
The acquisition of Greenland, yes. Which is not green, contrary to its marketing from Eric.
Nobody wants to go there. Fuck that place. It's cold.
Oh, man. Thanks for listening, guys. We'll talk next week.
Thank you for watching or listening to the Journal of Solar Culture. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe and leave us a comment. The first volume of our journal is available in paperback and now, finally, on Kindle. Pick it up in our store or on Amazon.